I'd like to call the meeting to order now. I would like to note that the governor, the mayor, the state controller, and the city controller have designated representatives to act for them at today's meeting. I would also like to thank the 3 private members for attending today's special session. I would also like to recognize Jeff Merdler, an observer from Senator Bruno's office. The reason for today's meeting is that the mayor has requested that the board take action regarding a new accounting standard concerning pollution remediation projects. At this time, I'd like to call on Mark Page to put forth the city's request.
The city's request to the Financial Control Board is that they defer a recently changed standard in generally accepted accounting principles, which addresses the treatment of expenditures for remediation of pollution. This could be oil in a brownfield, asbestos in a building, lead paint, things of that nature. We are asking for the deferral of the application of this change in GAAP to the city for its financial plan and definition of budget balance purposes for 2 reasons. One is that, as a practical matter, pollution remediation of this kind is very often incorporated within a given capital project. If you're reconstructing a school or an older building or modernizing some facility, frequently you come upon asbestos on pipes or ducts inside the walls, and it's a part of the ongoing project that is difficult to predict ahead of time, difficult to track separately. The overall project under this new standard would remain capital, but the piece of it relating to the asbestos treatment, for instance, would, under the standard, have to be paid for by New York City as a current expense, couldn't be financed by the city. As a logistical matter, that separation of costs is extremely difficult, complicated, and painstaking for us, and something that we are unable to do well in the year beginning on July 1st, and in fact there's some question of interpretation and additional standards which are expected from GASB on this issue, which have not yet been issued. So there's the logistical question that we're asking for a deferral in order to be able to better address. The second reason is that, in our view, the change in treatment of pollution remediation costs is actually not in the best interests of the city, the people who live here, use our services, pay taxes. As a practical matter, we have for some time, under GAAP standards prior to this amendment, treated the cost of, for instance, asbestos remediation as capital. We see it as investment in an asset with a very long, you could even think of it as an infinite useful life. If you have a facility which is contaminated with asbestos, crumbling insulation on pipes or what have you, as a practical matter, it has no useful life. You can't be in it. Whereas by the remediation of this pollution problem, you basically regain the useful life of the asset. The pollution problem is gone, and the useful life, as I said, goes on indefinitely. It's gone. So that we think it is appropriate that this would continue to be paid through financing, spreading the cost of the investment. That spreading the cost of the investment also basically makes it more possible for us to address pollution remediation costs as they face us. Our estimate of the annual cost of this remediation is anywhere up to $500 million a year. If we are obliged to address these costs with expense budget money, it puts them in direct competition with everything else that we're trying to do in terms of providing services and contain tax burden. And the likelihood is that there will be less resources overall available to address the obviously desirable purpose of pollution remediation. And we believe that therefore this change in gap is really not in the best interests of the city and the general public. So that's basically our second reason. It's cost and the purpose being served, as well as our technical problems with it, that have caused us to ask that the Financial Control Board exercise its existing powers to defer the application of a change in generally accepted accounting principles where the implementation of the change would have a bad effect on our ability to pay for our ongoing operations.
Thank you, Mark. Now I'd like to ask Jeff Sumner, Acting Executive Director, to give the staff's recommendation concerning the city's request.
Thank you. We have reviewed the mayor's request in the context that the gap budget balance requirement, as well as other provisions of the Financial Emergency Act, has been an important element in the city maintaining the fiscal discipline required to manage the budget. The law since inception anticipated a situation where immediate compliance with the new accounting standard would have an unwanted impact on the city's budget and allowed the board to grant additional time for a phase-in for budget purposes. I would like to note that the city and the board take the gap balance requirement seriously, and that while other new accounting standards have been implemented by the city over the 30 years, this is the first time the city has sought relief from immediate implementation. The staff has conferred with the city as required by the law and agrees that immediate implementation for budgetary purposes of GASB 49 could have an unwanted impact on the budget and services, and therefore recommends that the board adopt the resolution which is in your binders. The resolution would give the city until fiscal 2011 to implement GASB 49 for budgetary purposes. In addition, the resolution would call for the city to report to the board twice a year on the progress towards implementation. Again, the staff recommends passage of the resolution.
Thank you, Jeff. Would the State Controller's Office like to comment?
Yes, thank you, Laura. It's important to note that the city, just like the state, intends to comply fully with GASB 49 for financial reporting purposes as required by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. The city, however, is held to a higher standard than the state and other municipalities when it comes to budgeting. The City of New York is required under the Financial Emergency Act to also balance its budget in accordance with GAAP. The city has estimated that immediate compliance with GASB 49 for budgeting purposes would increase expense budget costs by $500 million annually because certain environmental remediation costs would no longer be eligible for capital reimbursement. These costs would hit the expense budget at the same time the city is dealing with the revenue losses anticipated from the Wall Street credit crisis. Then there's the technical challenge that City Budget Director Mark Page was describing of identifying the environmental remediation component of larger capital projects, such as school renovations. Pursuant to the Financial Emergency Act, the city would be unable to move forward with these important capital projects until the environmental remediation cost is identified, and the city has hired KPMG to assist in this effort. The Financial Emergency Act authorizes this board, as Jeff is describing, to phase-in implementation of new accounting standards when immediate implementation would have a substantial adverse impact on the delivery of essential municipal services. The city has already begun to reduce essential services, such as the size of the police force, in response to the current economic slowdown, and there's sufficient reason to believe that immediate implementation of GASB 49 for budgeting purposes would result in further reductions. Given these extraordinary circumstances, the State Controller believes that the proposed resolution, which would defer implementation of GASB 49 for budgeting purposes for 2 years, is both reasonable and appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Marcia, would you like to comment on behalf of the City Controller?
Yes, thank you. The City Controller concurs that immediate implementation of GASB 49 would have an adverse impact on city services, and that furthermore, in practical terms, the city is not ready to reflect this complex requirement in its financial plan. The Controller agrees with the FCB staff recommendation that a 2-year implementation deferral is warranted. Although the city may not be prepared to incorporate the new GASB standard into its budgetary planning process, the Controller's Office fully expects to follow the standard in its FY 2009 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. As an accounting matter, the CAFR will reflect the actual remediation expenses that will have been identified for that fiscal year. We are entering a period of fiscal stress. With the significant risk posed by GASB 49 to the budget starting in FY 2011, the prudent practices that have characterized this administration's budgeting will be more critical than ever.
Thank you, Marcia. Do any of the private members wish to comment on the city's request? On behalf of the Governor's Office, we would also like to show our support for the 2-year deferral. This is an issue that we attempted to address as we are preparing the state's and finalizing the state's budget, which we were not able to do. So we are also here to show our support. Do I have a motion to approve the resolution delaying the implementation of GASB 49 for budget purposes until July 1, 2010? Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The resolution is approved. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Moved.
Second.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.